Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another series of Edtech Disruptors. In this episode, I'm joined by Katherine Hamilton, VP of Programs at Ensemble Learning. In this episode, we explore her passion for creating equity for multilingual learners and driving meaningful change in education. From her journey as a math teacher to leading federal initiatives, Katherine shares how Ensemble Learning bridges the gap between curriculum and effective teaching practices. In this episode, you'll discover how Ensemble Learning supports schools with bespoke strategies for multilingual learners. We're going to learn about the importance of embedding culture and equity into the classroom, actionable tips for supporting educators and fostering collaboration with parents, and finding out how technology, including tools like Canva and AI, and how it enhances teaching efficacy as well as student engagement. So whether you're an educator, parent, or just passionate about improving education, this episode is jam-packed with insights that you won't want to miss. So pull up a chair, grab a cup of coffee or your favorite beverage, and as always, let's get ready to dive into this episode together. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Leena Marie Saleh, the Edtech Guru. I want to thank you so much for spending time with me on this journey, for all the support that you give me, and for following along. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and let's get ready to do this.
I'm good. I'm glad to be on today. Yeah, I think kind of throughout my life, if you ask my parents, I had always probably said I wanted to be a teacher, and I was always interested. I really loved school as a kid. I was very fortunate. It, served me well. And in college, I kind of hit a point where I realized I loved math, and math was such a gatekeeper for so many of my peers and other kids. And so I got into teaching math. I did a little bit kind of exploration as an undergrad. I got to join some graduate courses with folks kind of ahead in their journey. And my professor connected me with a graduate school at Stanford where they do a ton of math research with Joe Bowler and other folks kind of in the math world. So I did my credential, I did my student teaching, and I landed in Los Angeles at a small public charter school serving about 99% Latinx students, and really just fell in love thinking about how do I find that intersection of kids feeling confident in math, but also grappling with the language as many of them were multilingual learners. And I just kind of grew in this excitement about how do we build these systems of support for kids. And so I also really loved working with other teachers and examining our practice. And so I moved into instructional coaching, into kind of curriculum instruction, teaching and learning roles at the central office, coaching other teachers. And then I had this really unique opportunity when I was in that central office to meet Ensemble Learning and be a part of a small grant that they were doing where we spent some time away from the schools and we examined our data, really thought about how we serve our English learner, our multilingual learner students. And it was just, for me, brought together so many of what I was excited about in serving this really unique and really amazing group of students, but looking kind of structurally, instructionally at the barriers they were facing. And totally happenstance that as our grant was finishing, Ensemble Learning had earned a $7 million federal contract to continue the work and support schools, and they needed someone to come in and run that work. And so I was able to move into that nonprofit world at Ensemble Learning. Our whole mission is about, creating equity for multilingual learners. We get to work with teachers and school leaders and district leaders and even state education agencies, really thinking about how do we support these students in the classroom, in the culture of schools? And yeah, the rest is kind of history. I've been there almost 6 years and love it. Every day I get to, think about everything from the experience of students, parents, up to leaders, and just, you feel really lucky every day to do the work.
Question right out of my mouth.
Ensemble. Yeah. I think a big piece is we're a really small nonprofit. We have 12 employees. We're growing very conservatively and really focus a lot on quality over quantity in our relationships with our partners. And so some of our work we do through federal contracts or grants. Some of the work we work directly with school districts or individual schools. And we really try to partner and kind of embed ourselves within that context and community. And so doing, when we start a project with a school might, call us up and say, hey, like, we're looking at our data and our English learner students like are not making the same progress we want, both maybe in their English language development measured on WEET or other state tests, or maybe they're just not progressing in their content classes, and the school's saying, hey, we're underserving this group, like we need some help. And so we'll go in, we'll do an audit, we'll really deep dive their data, their walk through classrooms, look at their systems, look at their processes, and alongside teacher leaders, school leaders, really come up with what are the most impactful next steps that we can do? And usually some combination of like, what's the work that we're going to do with teachers? And then what's the work that we may do kind of in leadership coaching and kind of consulting in that way. So for example, we're working with a school in Los Angeles, and they're really excited about like increasing student talk. They're seeing that like students need more opportunity to practice academic language before they're writing or before they're going into like independent practice. And this is a huge thing we're seeing across kind of all schools, especially post-pandemic, is we have a lot more teacher talk than student talk. And our multilingual learners really need that chance to like orally practice. And so we've kind of built this goal. We've done a series of professional learning and then instructional coaching with those teachers so that they're learning really tangible new strategies. And then we're coaching them as they implement it to provide the language supports, kind of the universal accountability for students. And so that's really what kind of sets us apart, is like how deeply we go with a client and kind of with the work is, we also feel like when you're working with teachers, like you really need to understand deeply their practice and their strengths so you can build on those. Otherwise, you're not going to be tapping in so much to like the brilliance that a teacher brings and the nuance in their classroom. So that's really what's different. It's kind of that journey alongside a school versus coming in and trying to give like a quicker fix.
And that's really where a lot of the tools and products or services or any of those kinds of things will end up faltering, because they forget about the most important stakeholder of all, which is the teachers, which then impact the real true stakeholders, which we want are the students. But if we don't support that teacher, we're basically pouring a foundation and then setting a roof on top without building the house. So we have to make sure we build the house in order to support the students. So I think that's really special.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. People will say like, oh, Ensemble, like what product do you sell? Are you a curriculum? Are you? And it's like, we're selling the support. Like we are like the people that bridge that, like you have a new curriculum and you want it to create these outcomes for students, and we're bridging that. And in that, like we have worked with like all types of curriculum, all types of online programs, all like as we embed ourselves and support and just help build that capacity in the school versus, trying for that quick fix.
Quick fixes.
Yeah, I think a big thing we really try to coach teachers on is to actually think about both of those things together. And I think definitely this happens in secondary. And I can speak, having been a math teacher, you come in, you're really passionate about your content and you're like, great, kids are going to learn math. And it's realizing that in every piece of learning, there is the like math content, but then there's the academic language that goes with it. And like, how are we attending to both of those? Like, that's the first big thing for teachers to think about. And what we'll coach teachers on is say, look at your lesson, look at the task you're having students do, look at the assessment that you're ultimately going to give them. And let's look at all the language demands that exist. Like, what do students have to be listening to? What do the students have to be reading? What do they have to ultimately be talking about? And what do they have to be writing about? So looking at those 4 language domains, really unpacking the demand placed there, and then asking yourself, based on where my multilingual learners or my English learners are, what supports do they need to be able to like access the language and the content better? The other piece is, depending on your students' bilingualism or multilingualism, when we can decouple content and academic English, when you're focusing on content, if I'm like, hey, we're learning the Pythagorean theorem and like I'm helping kids conceptually understand it, also giving that not just permission, but encouragement for students to use whichever language is most comfortable. So if I have a classroom of students who are bilingual English, Spanish, saying, hey, as you're talking with your peers, if to build the math concept, you are accessing your linguistic repertoire of Spanish to talk about it, that's great. Now it's my role as a teacher to then help you bridge. So really thinking about how are they using language, not just like academic terms like hypotenuse or Pythagorean theorem or even like squared, but how are we using, if I'm asking them to explain or justify an answer, what are those like mortar words that go between our academic vocabulary for them to be able to share? And that's then coaching teachers on, practices to make their classroom language rich. Do we have our word wall? Do we have sentence frames? Practices to be really clear about the differentiated strategies, such as, for a newcomer English learner, it might be more fill in the blank as they're learning the English, academic English. For a long-term English learner, a student who has higher proficiency, it's starting to teach them more complex ways to express their thinking in English. And so that's like kind of the number one framing is like your role, whatever you're teaching, kindergarten through 12th grade through college, if you're serving multilingual learners, students who are still developing that academic language, is really thinking about content and language as distinct and then how they work together, distinct things and how they work together.
Really, really challenging for them to understand the concepts. It's not that they couldn't do the work. It's this that they don't understand that like academic based language. So I think accessing what you know is important, and being able to support them in that way too is.
Yeah. Language is so much part of your identity too. So if you're in a place where a teacher invites you to show up as your full self and use all of your linguistic strengths versus a place where a teacher says, oh, you can only tap into this piece of you that speaks English. Like I'm really lucky to have so many of my colleagues are like fluently bilingual. And I always say to them, there's a beauty in the nuance of how you can communicate, because you can always seem to find the exact right word, because I find that they're thinking more deeply about language and able to just communicate in just that extra effective way. And so I just think we've done a lot of harm in the past in promoting English only education. And I think we're working to kind of pay reparations to that in terms of like honoring and helping children build bilingualism now. Yeah, I think it's really in how we've built our program model. We base it on what we call a learning cycle. And so, in the same way where we say like, we really want to embed ourselves in a school and understand everything that's happening, we also want to walk alongside a teacher as they're trying something new, implementing something new. And so we'll start that learning cycle with, a professional development, professional learning session. And ours are very like narrow focused of like, here's the like one instructional move that we're like going to work to implement. And we always generally multiple times actually like model it and have the teachers experience it so that they can experience the value of some of the nuanced moves. For example, there's an instructional strategy called QSSA. It's from Seidlitz Education, and it's just a way of doing structured student talk that kind of provides these scaffolds. So the QSSA are question, signal, stem, share, assess. And so it helps kind of through the process. And so we'll often open the PD with the teachers participating in one. And it's one of those things where one of the facets, one of the S's is signal, and it's really a way to like ensure wait time. So you'll pose a question and kind of a language frame for students or for the teachers to use. And then you say, when you're ready to share, put your finger on your nose or give me a thumbs up or something. With adults, I often just do like thumbs up, but don't make them do silly things. But there's that nuance of like, oh, when I participated in it, it gave me the right amount of think time because I could signal that I was ready to share. And I think then it makes you more inclined to like include those little nuanced pieces in your own instruction. And then in that professional learning, we'll model it, we'll unpack it with teachers, we'll share the research about why it works, kind of what effectiveness a strategy has. And then we'll immediately go into like planning and integration, thinking about your students. How can you plan this? And we say plan it for tomorrow, or at least, the next few days, because then you're going to start to integrate it in your practice. The second piece of our learning cycle is that we do very quick follow-up coaching, where we will jump on usually a Zoom with them and just say, hey, how'd it go? Checking in so that we can workshop, hey, this didn't go well, or I have questions about this. And they get that real immediate follow-up support and feedback. And if they're in a place where they didn't get to implement it, we help them plan it right then and there and say, oh, great, like let's use our expertise and help you out. And then generally we'll follow up with a walkthrough and observing it in kind of multiple classrooms with instructional coaches, school leadership, or sometimes teacher leaders. So then we can say, how is it going school-wide, and what's the next right step for our next learning cycle? So that when teachers walk into PD with us, they know it is based on exactly what we have seen, what they've told us, the feedback that they've given us. And there's this continuity of what they're doing. And in that way, they feel supported. They also know like this is a priority. And so if it's between this and, trying something else, because they're going to get the coaching and the follow-up and they know we're coming with the walkthrough, their leaders have prioritized this as, something to be happening on campus. The other piece that I don't think we talk about enough is when you bring in someone like Ensemble Learning, how is this work fitting into your strategic plan for the year versus coming in and saying, we're doing this extra thing with Ensemble. And so we've actually, said, even though we're a nonprofit and we're, everyone's always working to stay afloat and have a strong budget and all of this, like we've actually said to schools, hey, you're not ready to work with us this year. Like, because we don't want to waste your time. We don't want to waste your resources, but like you have some culture pieces to work on, or you have these other pieces before we can dig into this instructional strategy. And we really want to make sure that it's the right, that the focus of the school is going to be in line with this, because, all of us know as teachers, there were still moments that you're like, oh my goodness, I'm working on like 8 things. How is this possible? And we really try to coach the leaders to say, how is this part of what you're already doing versus something new, so that we can really get teachers to buy in and have the capacity to do these strategies.
We'll just go, okay, yeah, we'll just hop in or whatever. And then that's how there's not going to be success if there's not buy-in from all stakeholders, or they're not ready. Sometimes they're just not ready. And
Actually the first like federal grant that we got that I came on board to run, the whole premise was developing leaders in service of multilingual learners, and the importance of, if you don't have someone at the helm of the school who has this vision for equity and then knows how to build the systems of culture and the systems of instruction to support teachers, like teachers could be spinning their wheels. And so I think it's so important to have that whole school mentality and everyone on board as you're working. It's hard work. Like none of this is easy, and it's really, you got to give the right support. Yeah, I think a piece of that is when we look at, to back up slightly, when we're coaching for instruction, like we also, like we're never decoupling instruction and culture. Like those all are a big part. And the way that we engage parents and, that community of stakeholders says a lot about the school culture. And so one of the things is saying, especially, well, really everywhere, multilingual learners are the fastest growing student group in the US. And so it's something, whether if your school has a lot of multilingual learners or English learners right now, you understand. And if you don't, like in the next 10, 15 years, you likely will. And the reality of that is we have to not just think about how do I engage parents, but how do I engage parents who may not speak the dominant language of English and who may not have gone to school in the United States. And so it's overcoming these barriers to create a culture where there's that sense of belonging. So in the same way we do with students in the classroom, say, hey, you can come in and learn content and speak whatever language is going to help you with that content. And then I'm going to support you to develop the English language. Same way with parents, is saying, how are we building opportunities that say, like, welcome, this place is for you. And if you're a school leader or a teacher who isn't bilingual or multilingual, that is fine. It's what are the supports you put in place so a parent could come in and communicate their excitement about the school or their needs in their home language. So some of it is some of these like kind of logistical, strategic, like, how do you do translation of documents? How do you do translation for meetings? Do you do separate meetings in different languages? Do you translate one meeting, but it's going to be longer? Because I think schools even grapple with, oh, we're going to have an English meeting and a Spanish meeting, but then they're kind of creating a lack of cohesion among the community and a little bit of like that segregation unintentionally. The thing we like really celebrate and encourage schools to do is to think about the experience, like from the front gate to the front door to the classroom that a parent has. And are there ways that we can communicate that languages other than English are welcome? You know, a lot of our partner schools are dual language bilingual schools. And so they naturally are working towards like, how do we celebrate both of the languages we teach in? But I always say in other schools, do you have signage that makes it so any of your parents know like how to get in and where to go? And just some of those simple things of like making sure that they feel welcome and making sure that they can communicate in whatever language. As a teacher, I was nervous. I was not fluent in Spanish, and I had a lot of parents who only spoke Spanish. And I hit a point where I realized, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be the effort and it has to be the information. And so I would use technology to help me, and technology's only gotten better since I was teaching, but like I can translate, make sure it kind of looks right. I can check with colleagues and just trying to make those calls so that parents know that I'm, making the effort is really what matters a lot. Cause then it says, yeah, you can be vulnerable and speak to me in English, a language you don't feel as comfortable in. Like, this is a safe space where you're welcome. But I don't think for schools, it's like, you have to be doing so much and it's like rocket science. I think it's a lot just about like pausing and asking, if I'm a parent who doesn't speak English and I step onto this campus or I get communication from the school, does it communicate that I am welcome? And if it doesn't, where are the ways we can provide strategic translation and openness so parents do feel welcome? Yeah. One of the strategies and tools we recommend and we'll coach schools on is an empathy interview. And it's essentially an interview, but it's really digging to understand the experience someone is having. And so, picking some picking some parents and saying, I want to understand your experience a little more. And similarly for students, like, I want to understand your experience. Tell me about what it's like when you get to school in the morning, like who says hi to you? Like, even those things. Does the student know, if a student is like an earlier proficiency multilingual learner, do they know the adults on campus who speak their home language? So if they have a emergency or something and they just need a safer space where they can speak the language they're most comfortable in, do they know, oh, this teacher speaks Spanish? Or we work with a large school here in Los Angeles that has a lot of newcomer students. So students who've been in the US for less than 3 years, learning English, and they pride themselves. They probably speak 20 languages across all their newcomers. They have a staff member who speaks every single language. And it might be, oh, this is the person who like is one of the breakfast cooks, but they make sure there is a person and they make sure they connect the student with that person so that if there is a moment that student needs something, there is someone there, without technology, without whatever, that they can like go and speak a comfortable language to. Yeah. Helpful. Yeah. I think, there's so many wonderful things that technology can do and enhance. And I've been appreciative, I'll kind of a slight background. I've been appreciative that there has not been the push in education to say like, AI will replace teachers. Like, I think that we've hopefully, for the most part, or at least the people I feel are rational, have said, hey, what teachers do with students, we cannot replicate with a computer. But let's look at AI, let's look at other tech tools, and let's figure out how it can make more time for teachers to do what they do best, differentiate, individualize, build relationships. And so, on a very small scale, just the availability of like enhanced tools, like I will pander to you, like I use Canva when I do demo lessons because I can find the biggest array of images that are going to appropriately match like what I'm doing. And so, for example, I'm doing a demo lesson in a 5th grade math classroom tomorrow where we're doing the 3 read strategy in math. And a really big important piece of it is providing some visuals so students can unpack the academic language. And I use Canva because I can go and get exactly the visuals I need. And then I can use my teacher expertise to say, now that I have these appropriate visuals, am I going to do a total physical response for them to learn the language? Like, how am I going to interact with it? But it takes away the like longer time, like Googling, image search, this and that to find that piece that I need. The other thing is just, I think the like ability to enhance the time when we do differentiated time. So when a teacher is doing a small group instruction, the availability of like vetted high quality technology for students to use to do some independent practice that's going to differentiate to their needs. And what we really love, as we're thinking about multilingual learners, is so many of these tools, Zern, iReady, other like programs provide language support embedded. So it can be a time when that's the time a student's focusing on the math content. And so they can use the language supports. And then as a teacher, I have a small group. I know my other students are working really well because they're in a self-paced program. And then I can really target what my small group needs. And so I think both small and large ways, even make one other kind of recommendation. One thing we see, a lot of schools are seeing this influx of newcomer emergent bilingual students. So coming in with very, very low English proficiency, new to the country, and teachers can feel a really heavy lift to like provide translated materials. And so especially for older students, we really talk about like what technology tools are available for students to provide their own translations. Not that teachers shouldn't support students, but if I'm visiting France and I don't speak French, I'm going to use tech tools if I need to translate something. And so it's building also like real world skills and the ability of, tablets or Chromebooks for students to take something and even take a picture of it and to translate it, but putting that tech in students' hands so that they have access to the content and the learning versus like waiting for a teacher to translate or for something else to be provided to them, really letting them be active partners kind of in their learning. Yeah. So we're really excited, I think, generally for teaching, but I think especially as we think about our multilingual learners and like multiple languages, technology can enhance that so much.
Of things. I also was hearing you, not that I'm plugging Canva, but just because we talk about this, and that is the work that I do is creating content for teachers to use Canva. So there's also an ability, there's also, and then having those images that you can easily replace within a button, I think is really important. So I love that you're saying that you're, leveraging technology. I think it would be a missed opportunity if you weren't, obviously, but I think that's just an important player in the field. And I think it is only designed, if done in the right way, to make teachers' lives easier so that they can focus on what they're good at, which is helping students succeed and diversifying, and creating those relationships and engagement for students.
The thing I just want to highlight from what you're saying about like the feature to translate, another underlying issue we run into in schools is the unpaid labor of our bilingual teachers and staff who do not often get compensated to translate this parent-teacher conference or, oh, will you translate this document? And I think for people who aren't bilingual, you think like, oh, this is so quick and so easy. And it takes time and it's often unpaid work that people who are bilingual are doing because they believe strongly in equity and access. And so I think a big piece is like, if we can leverage technology tools to do a lot of that heavy lift, then we're also like a very small piece, but we're addressing some of the issues around teacher burnout for especially teachers of color and multilingual teachers who are having to bear the brunt of some of this unpaid labor and focus on equity. And I think that is super huge. And I think people worry that the translation isn't perfect. And so I think a lot of places it's like, we'll use Google Translate, we'll use the translation on Canva, we'll just vet it very quickly. Mm-hmm. But I will say, like, I used to do this when I was teaching and it was okay. And it's just gotten better and better and better. And like that spot check versus like, hey, will you translate everything is a big time saver.
Let's check before.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is please connect with us. You can find our website is just ensemblelearning.org. And we offer like free calls and consultations, just helping people kind of get in the right direction and then also determine if it makes sense to work directly with us. And what's really exciting is, we're building a lot of partnerships, kind of regional partnerships or like consortium partnerships where we're able to support schools without kind of that direct financial investment from the school because we know budgets are super tight. And so I would say just finding us on our website or on LinkedIn, we're at Ensemble Learning, or connecting with me personally. I know in the show notes or kind of what goes out, we'll have my email or find me, Katherine Hamilton, on LinkedIn at Ensemble Learning. But we're clearly nerds for this. And so like, we like to welcome people into our family and point you in the right direction. And if that right direction is like that we can support you directly, like we would be ecstatic to do that. And if the right direction is, hey, like we're going to point you to a few strategies you're going to use, you have the capacity, like we can help and be your thought partner and even connect you with other regions or schools that are doing similar work as we kind of build out our network. We're continuing to, apply for that federal funding and really try to work to impact the field. And then we'll be at the NABE conference, National Association for Bilingual Education, and then also doing a bit of work around teacher preparation and residencies. So if any of that is interesting, like come join us in this journey. Yes. Well, thank you. It's really fun to hear the journey as like past teaching that folks have, and from one Canva nerd and fan to someone who works there. Appreciate your work. It really does make such a difference when I get to do demo lessons and stuff like that. So I recommend it to everyone. And I hope to, connect with some folks after the episode today. Bye.
Thank you so much. You've made it this far. We are so thankful that you're here. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, thumbs up, comment below, and join us for all of our next videos. Thank you so much for joining us as we disrupt education together. See you guys soon. Bye, everybody.